Just a quick note on the fascinating stuff that Jan talked about the movement. There's some brilliant research available from the academic studies. So if you're a developer and you want to know more about how to convince people that they're walking straight when they're actually going in a circle and how to move people around small spaces, there's some great academic studies out there, which a lot of developers don't ever look at the academic journals, but there have been VR research students and people in the UK for many, many years before Oculus and before PlayStation VR, doing some great research on VR and how to move people around spaces. So it's definitely worth exploring if you want to know more. Right, so I've talked about VR a bit over the last few years, but I want to talk about an area that's incredibly exciting to me at the moment, one that I think is going to be absolutely huge, and explain a little bit about why I'm so excited, why I think there are so many opportunities, and just what a great area it is. I'm going to talk about where VR and eSports are at the moment, in the very early sort of beginnings of something I think is going to be big, why this area is so exciting, some of the challenges, how eSports fits into AR as well as VR, and also a summary of why I think it's going to be huge at the end. I'll give you a little bit very quickly about us, and then I won't talk about nDreams again. We're a VR and AR developer and publisher based in the UK. We're about 65 people. We've been doing VR since 2013. We've launched 7 VR games so far, sold about 300,000 units. And we're, as well as creating and building our own IP, we're doing some big projects for other companies as well. We're particularly interested in arcade VR at the moment, and looking at eSports is an area that we're doing some prototyping and looking into as well. This is Shooty Fruity, which came out just before Christmas, which was currently the highest rated shooter on PlayStation VR ever, which we're very proud about. Right, enough about us. So eSports, let me give you a little bit of background to where eSports are at the moment. Hopefully a few of you know a lot about eSports, but it's an incredibly exciting area, and then I'll talk about how it relates to VR. So it's worth $1.5 billion by 2017. This doesn't include the betting side of it, so there's gambling on teams and all sorts of other stuff, but purely revenue being generated from competitions and teams and sponsors and all the eSports community, about $1.5 billion. Over $100 million in prize money last year. So there's some fairly serious money starting to come into this area. Over 3,700 tournaments, 300 million people watch eSports every day. And the biggest games on eSports tend to be, at the moment, PUBG, Overwatch, Dota 2, League of Legends, Rocket League, Counter-Strike, Hearthstone, all the kind of games that you would probably imagine. But equally, in terms of users looking at videos and watching and interacting and watching people play, actually games like FIFA and Call of Duty, although they're not really eSports and they don't have many tournaments, are very, very popular. If you look at the stats on Twitch and YouTube, lots and lots of people are actually watching FIFA videos, Call of Duty videos. So I think they kind of count. Interestingly, the Overwatch League just started a few weeks ago, attracted 10 million viewers in its first week. I think it had about 350,000 concurrent viewers. So it's a pretty impressive start for the Overwatch League, which I think is unique to Twitch. Twitch paid a lot of money to Blizzard to fund that. So yeah, doing really well, and eSports is definitely a very vibrant and very fast-growing area at the moment. Forecast to grow rapidly, excuse me. And it's huge. This is one of the eSports tournament finals. These are big things. These take place in bloody huge arenas with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people watching locally, and then you've got millions of people watching live online. So it's a really, really big and very exciting area. VR. Let's talk about some numbers of VR. Over 3 million high-end VR headsets now. So that's the PlayStation VR, Oculus Rift, and Vive. Over 10 million non-cardboard mobile VR headsets. I don't tend to count the cardboard because they skew the numbers massively and are not really being used. And we're starting to see hardware prices finally dropping. So finally we're seeing PlayStation VR, Oculus, Vive coming down nicely, which is certainly reduced. Oh, thank you, you're a star. Thank you, Jan. So we're starting to see hardware prices finally dropping, which is great, and that's really boosted hardware install base, particularly from sort of September onwards. Around Black Friday onwards, we've seen some really good numbers in terms of Oculus, Vive and PlayStation. And we've got new headsets coming out. Oculus Go, which is their sort of mobile portable Oculus, the Vive Pro and the Santa Cruz. And I'm particularly excited about the last two. For me, the perfect VR headset is portable, it's wireless, it doesn't plug into a PC, it's got everything on board, it does hand tracking, it has full 6 degrees of freedom, and it's inside-out tracking, so you don't need any other sensors. And something like the Santa Cruz is finally delivering on that dream. It just works. You just put the headset on, you wander around, you reach, you grab, and it just works beautifully. And for me, that's the start of proper VR. Everything up to then with wires and tethered and needing expensive PCs has been kind of the pre-production. This is proper VR starting to come around, which is exciting. We're seeing location-based VR growing really rapidly. Lots and lots of different people entering this space in lots of different ways, but actually all the data that we've seen is that people are making money. These are profitable. The VR centres are making money, and therefore more and more people are investing in them. So really excited about that particular segment. Lots of forecasts from analysts. Analysts forecasting, the last one I saw, about 90 billion by 2021. Now that might be a bit optimistic, seems high to me, but certainly lots and lots of positivity about VR and AR. I completely agree with some of the talks earlier. We're in a slow growth stage. We're certainly nowhere near taking off and growing rapidly, but it's getting there. It's starting to grow quite nicely, and I think it will get there. It's just going to be a little bit of time whilst the technology and whilst the prices and whilst the software comes together. So, put eSports and VR together. Where are we at the moment? Well, we've seen the first league, the VR Challenger League. This has been created by Intel, Oculus, and ESL, and primarily runs with two games. One is Echo Arena, which is sort of a multiplayer spin-off from the amazing Lone Echo. If you've ever read Ender's Game, it's a little bit like that. It's kind of throwing balls around in zero-G, floating around, trying to score goals. A really nice little first eSports sort of title for VR. And also The Unspoken, which is spellcasting, jumping between pedestals, firing weapons and spells and fireballs at other players, creating shields, and basically having a one player versus one player battle inside these arenas. Both very early. I wouldn't say that either of them are nearly as advanced as the best esports games, but this is where VR esports is starting. Excuse me. And this is what it looks like. So this is the Challenger League on stage. One thing you may notice is they're a little bit more active than traditional esports players, who you tend to see sat there with a keyboard and a mouse, which is much better to look at, actually. So you see people moving and diving and stuff, and I think that's going to get bigger and better as esports moves along. There's also another interesting trend coming along at the moment, which is interactive spectating. It's something that YouTube and Twitch are pushing very hard. So the idea here is that there's extensions that allow viewers to interact with live streams. So you're watching a game live, and rather than just watching it and going, oh yeah, that's good, so-and-so's winning, you can actually interact. For example, you might vote on a random event. There's a vote coming up, and whichever event gets the most votes suddenly is triggered inside the game and happens to the players. And that's really exciting. It's something that YouTube and Twitch are very excited about. Or maybe you'll make the game harder or easier for the player, or vote on in-game music, or do the whole Hunger Games, you know, liking a player and putting drops in to help them out and sort of becoming their sponsor. So there's lots and lots of possibilities with interactive spectating, and I think that's an interesting trend which you'll see coming into VR esports. I think it'll work even better inside VR because you're inside the world. You can actually see what you're doing, what you're voting for, what's going on. And there's a few other examples. The game on the left is Spark by CCP, which allows you to go in and spectate a match. So you can sit there and watch two players battling it out. And the one on the right is, I think, Project Cars 2, where you're actually able to go and spectate a replay in VR and actually go watch your lap and watch the cars and watch what happened in your race. This is the most interesting example, though. So this is Dota 2. This has been created by Valve, I think it was, actually. And so you can see on the map, you can see what's happening. You can see a 2D view, but you can also jump into 3D, move around anywhere in the environment, and actually be inside this battle, inside this Dota 2 match that's going on, jumping around and watching what's going on and seeing the best players playing around you, and actually getting inside the action and seeing what's happening. And I think, for me, this is what's so exciting, is actually being inside the matches, looking around, feeling like you're there, spectating inside of them. That's something that you just can't do any other way. And that makes these VR esports matches much more powerful. So why am I so excited by this area? Why do I think it's going to be so big in the next few years? Well, as I sort of mentioned, you're spectating inside the game. You're actually there inside the match, looking around, seeing what's going on, able to actually feel like you're inside it as opposed to looking on a 2D screen. And all the great things that you get with VR, that sense of emotion, the senses, the emotions that you get that are heightened because of being in VR absolutely work when you're spectating in VR as well. So I think being inside the game is a really big feature of VR that makes esports much cooler. Also, VR players are much more entertaining to watch. As I said, most esports players are sat there with keyboards and mice. They're not good. You know, it works, the game's entertaining, but watching the players is not an interesting thing to do, really, except at the end of the match when they're all high-fiving and jumping around. This is a driving multiplayer VR example, but they're all in these hydraulic chairs, they're spinning around. That's quite cool to watch and see. But equally, jumping around stage, running around is cool. And I think I'll talk a little bit more about the void and how this stuff might go into that, but I think that becomes even more exciting. So I think that's another big thing for VR and esports, is that watching the players is much more fun. And also you have to be more athletic, so you're kind of getting a mix of athletes and players as well, which I think is quite cool. Yes, I've kind of said that. And it's also great for sports or games that require physical actions. For example, if you wanted a golf esports championship, playing it on a keyboard and mouse makes no sense, but actually using hand tracking and watching the players actually play shots is much, much more natural. Anything that requires throwing, moving, hiding, peeking and sneaking, and moving between cover, VR and motion tracking and body tracking is perfect as an interface for that, much better than a keyboard and a mouse. So I think you'll see new games and new experiences come along that use those properly. And it's great to watch people jumping, punching and ducking. Where it gets really exciting for me is when you combine it with actual sort of physical spaces. So if you guys know, I don't know if you know much about The Void. The Void is this incredible example of high-end VR arcade experiences where you've got effectively a warehouse with walls and doors and doorways, and the players put VR on and they're wandering around. And when you see a wall, which might look absolutely beautiful, it might be a huge palace or a mansion or a Star Wars a lava field, but if you touch the wall, it's actually there in real life. So everything that's mapping that you're seeing is mapped one-to-one. You see other players, you can see them waving, you've got hand tracking, you can walk wherever you want. So you're within this world, but it's physical. You're touching the walls, you're touching the things, you're ducking behind things, and you can actually feel it and see it, but it looks spectacular in VR. So for me, when players can run around in VR inside physical spaces, and they can see the most incredible VR, whether it's a Wild West saloon and they're running around, but it just looks stunning, but also spectators can be in there in VR, watching this action going on inside this Wild West saloon, seeing, being able to move wherever they want. That's exciting for me. That's really exciting. So I think there's something big about this combination of athletic esports players running around physical locations. And this is a quick example. You may have seen this, I think it's only a minute or two long, but this is The Void. So this gives you an example of what I'm talking about. Once they get past there. So this is a space with, as you can see, pretty much boring grey walls, but actually the idea is what you see in VR is so much more than what's actually there. So again, everything's kind of grey, everything's simple, but you don't see that. You just see whatever the designers create, and it's a really fascinating spectacle, and I think a good example of where arcade VR and high ends of location-based VR is going. You've got body, really easy to put on physical chest. You've got sub-pack type stuff in there, so it's giving you big, beefy bass and feedback. You've also got smells, you've got heat, you've got 4D elements in it as well. And just a really interesting mix of the physical and virtual. If you haven't had a chance to try it, definitely worth having a go, but you can actually touch levers. You see a lever and you can actually pull the lever in real reality. Everything you see kind of matches with what you see in VR, and I think, as I said, this is a really interesting combination, really interesting example of where I see location-based VR going in a big way, and tracking of guns and movement and everything with other players. So it works really well. It's more immersive for the players. So for players, you're able to use haptics, wearable subwoofers, these sub-packs, wind and smell. So when you're playing in VR, it's a much more immersive experience than playing on a screen with a keyboard and a mouse. It's also more immersive for the spectators, because if you're at home and you're in VR, you can get all of this stuff. You can certainly have sub-packs at home, you can get haptics, you can get touch control, you can actually immerse yourself more. And there are more ways for spectators to interact with the players because you're inside the environment. But there are some big challenges. I think the key challenges at the moment is that a lot of esports games that are popular now don't work in VR. Lots of them have complex control systems, require lots of keys on a PC keyboard. They're designed for the interface that they use. Now, I don't think that's a big problem, because for me, the big esports VR games will be designed specifically for that medium. You're not going to be taking Dota 2 or taking League of Legends into VR. I think there will be new games, new types of esports that come out designed around VR. A much bigger issue is the VR hardware install base. So for VR esports to be big, you need your spectators to have VR headsets at home to be inside there. And at the moment, there's still a relatively small number, around 3 million high-end headsets and maybe 10, 11 million mobile headsets, Gear VRs and the like. And we need that to get bigger for this to be viable. So for this reason, I think VR esports is still a few years off, although you're going to see more of the kind of Challenger League type things. And I think you will see it start to grow. But I do think the people who spectate in esports tend to be technology-led, tend to be happy, and happy to spend money on technology. And as soon as you see these all-in-one headsets coming down, and you don't need a powerful PC, you don't need a PlayStation, you can stick them on and they work well, I think you'll see this take off more and more. So this is a problem of time rather than anything else, I think. And also, we need a killer VR esports title. It's a chicken and the egg. There isn't one there at the moment. You know, this is Spark from CCP, which I mentioned earlier. It's a cool game, but it's effectively two people chucking and bouncing a ball between each other. You know, it's good, it's fun to play, but it's a spectator sport. You know, compared to Dota 2 or League of Legends, it's way off. Compared to Hearthstone, it's way off. It's very simplistic. So we need killer VR esports titles. We're doing a little bit of prototyping in this area. It's a really exciting space, and hopefully you'll see this start to come over the next year or two as more people invest in this space, and you'll see more come out. At the moment, there's very, very few titles, and it's a bit of a chicken and the egg. You need great stuff to attract spectators and to attract the money. Let me talk a little bit about AR and esports, because AR is a fascinating area. As I think Simon said earlier, I think VR and AR are both two fascinating areas. I actually see the two coming together ultimately. For me, a brilliant AR headset has to be able to draw in front of stuff, has to do full tracking, has to do hand tracking, and therefore could be used as VR. So what I hope is ultimately the glasses that we all dream about, the Morpheus glasses that we saw earlier in the slide, will be VR and AR and be able to allow you to switch between the two. So I hope the two are going to come together. But this is the magic leap. I think there are probably three areas that are interesting for esports. One, the lowest hanging fruit is live feeds. So you want to see the latest match, you stick your live feed on the wall inside your house, and you're able to interact with your family and your friends, but also watch the live feed, watch the match going on as it happens. So very simplistic kind of overlay AR attached to a wall. I think dioramas are really interesting, because there's no reason you couldn't have your Dota or your League of Legends diorama on the table in front of you, and you can actually use your headset to look in and watch the players running around and watch what's going on. So I think diorama viewing and spectating is really interesting in AR, where it appears on the table, overlaid over the real world. And possibly even using AR with something like the Void, so, or full-scale gaming, where you can actually mix real elements with AR elements. You can see the floor, you can see the walls, but then other bits, or maybe characters or creatures or AI are rendered in over the top in AR, and you combine physical gaming AR with the actual physicality, which I think could be quite interesting. So, to summarize, I think the mix of VR and esports is going to be huge. I think it's got so much potential for all the reasons I've mentioned, and I really do think we will see a point, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years away, where VR esport is bigger or as big as the biggest esports at the moment, probably bigger, and I think that has genuinely huge potential. It's a logical blend of two of the fastest growing areas of gaming, but it's still a few years away from going mass market. However, it's a really interesting space to get into and understand, and one that I predict is going to be massive. Will it be a better experience than non-VR esports? Yes. At the end of the day, I think that spectating in VR, playing in VR, is going to be a much better experience than watching a 2D screen because of all the reasons I've said, but particularly because you're inside the world, you're inside the game, you actually feel like you're there watching what's going on inside that. And I think that just makes it a league apart from traditional esports. That's why I believe this is going to be so exciting. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I told you to run over a bit, and you didn't. You're perfectly on time.
Sorry.
I'm really disappointed. Right, so if anyone has any questions, now's the time to ask them. Please ask your questions really slowly so we can make up time.
I agree with like 98% of what you're saying, and I think it's going to be really interesting. One of the things that, because we're also sort of dabbling in that field for multiplayer, one of the things that I'm wondering about being a spectator sport is that VR, more than AR, but to a degree AR as well, requires you to focus on what you're looking at.
Yep.
Whereas most people that I know, and that's just personal experience, I don't have any numbers to back that, are watching any and all esports on a site, like on a second screen in the background. Yep. It's like running a TV. Is that something that you think might be an issue, or do you think the focus will become more into VR because the experience is so much more engaging that people don't mind actually spending that time?
That's a good question. I think you're right at the moment. An awful lot of esports viewing, and I don't have, we haven't done much research in this area, so I suspect you are right that most esports viewing is done second screening whilst doing other stuff at the same time, keeping an eye on it. I hope that the interactivity and having certainly big games, having big finals, big tournaments will be enough to be inside VR and to take yourself away from anything else. But for that reason, I think you may find it is AR. Maybe it will be dioramas where you're seeing the players run around in front of you and you're watching, but also able to have conversations at the same time. But my gut is that there is enough immersion and enough power if you do it right for people to be absolutely hooked and for wanting it to be there 100% of their focus. I certainly hope so, but we'll see. It's a good question.